So last week, Brother David, when he was finishing up, he got to the point in the narrative where it was really the end of the 40 years that Moses was to spend in the wilderness. We're to a transition point here now, and I thought about whether or not how much I wanted to read and then go back, but I'm going to read the first 10 verses, and we're going to break that down, and then we'll continue on. Tonight we're going to go from 3:1 to 4:18. So I got a lot of reading to do. So again, I'm kind of glad it's not being recorded because you're going to be here a while. So the Word of God says, "Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. And he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Oreb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites and the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." So my Roman numeral 1 is the prologue. The prologue is verse 1. Moses was in the right place. He was in the wilderness. He had spent the last 40 years in the wilderness. Now, when we think of 40, we think of the number of testing. Just like Jesus was in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights after his baptism from John the Baptist, Moses was in the wilderness for 40 years. And in the wilderness, that is a place of testing. It's a place where not only of testing, but of solitude. When you're in the wilderness, you can be shaped by God. I think about our society today and how that we have so much distractions. I think some of us, all of us, need time to get away, to be in the wilderness, to be in a place where we can hear from God. Because I don't know about you, but I have come to the point where when I'm in the car, wherever I'm at, I got to have noise. I got to have the radio on. I got to have a talk show going. I got to have the TV on. Even when I'm working in my office, I will put the TV on, and I'm not even paying attention to it, but I got to have background noise. And it's just because of the way that we are really what we're accustomed to. But you know what? The word amusement, because we do all these things to amuse ourselves. And amuse simply means as in not, and muse as in to think. And amuse, when you amuse yourself, you go to an amusement park, you watch TV, you do all these things so that you won't have to think about life. Because honestly, sometimes life can be overwhelming. And Moses, when he was in the wilderness, he had plenty of time to think. He had plenty of time to think about his past. He had plenty of time to think about where he had come from and why he wasn't there any longer. He had plenty of time to think about the mistakes he made when he stepped out and he was going to do something for God and for God's people. And yet it didn't work out the way he planned it. And now here he was in the wilderness. And the wilderness is a place of it's arid, it's dry, it's sand, it's windy. And I thought about that. I thought about how the wilderness can be a place of refinement. Because when you think about, I used to be a shade tree mechanic. And we would have parts that we would need to dress up. So what would we do? We'd take them to a machine shop and they would sandblast them. And the sandblasting would get rid of all of that surface stuff that kept it from performing at its peak. And after the sandblasting, then it was ready. It was ready for service. And I think that's what Moses was going through. He was going through a refinement. He was being sandblasted by the sand and the winds of the desert. So he was in the right place. He was not only in the wilderness, but he was at Mount Oreb. Mount Oreb is also known as Mount Sinai. They're interchangeable. They're the same place. And the writer, who is Moses, talks about it being the mountain of God. Now, whether it was called the mountain of God at that time, I don't know. But in retrospect, it certainly was the mountain of God. So it was called the mountain of God, and for good reason. Because not only did Moses meet there, but then later the people of God would get the Ten Commandments there. So he was in the right place. He was also in the right position. And when I say that, I'm talking about his position in society. Here was Moses. He was now a servant. Rather than being second in command in Egypt, just under Pharaoh, Pharaoh's daughter, and all that had been stripped away, and now he was a servant of his father-in-law, Jethro. He was tending sheep. He was a shepherd. He went from the prince of Egypt to a shepherd. Can you imagine the difference? It was a place where it brought him to a place of humility. And you know, God can't use somebody who's proud. God hates pride. When we talk about the 7 things that God hates, one of those is pride. God hates pride. Why does he hate pride so much? Because it's you thinking you're more than what you are. And Moses certainly thought that when he was in Egypt. But now he's gotten to the point over 40 years where he's been a servant of his father-in-law Jethro. He's been tending sheep. He's out in the desert, and he does not have a high opinion of himself any longer. And we'll see that as the story progresses. When I thought about him keeping the flock of his father-in-law, who else do we know that did that? Jacob did that. But Jacob's outcome was much different. Jacob's outcome was much different because God needed him for a different call. So God needed him to develop and grow and become a great nation. So God blessed him and enriched him. God needed Moses for something different. God needed Moses to be a leader of his people who was humble. And so he was in the right position. He was also at the right point in time. Moses was ready. His pride had been replaced with humility. His self-esteem was replaced with insecurity. And we'll see that again as we get on further into the narrative. He had got to the point where he wasn't really sure about himself, about his giftings, about his abilities. He had been very sure. When you're the prince of Egypt, you're trained, you're in the best, in all the games, and you're taught, you're educated, and you're very sure of yourself. But he wasn't that way now. He was to a point of insecurity. And I think that to a degree, God's people need to be that way. And insecure, not in oh, woe is me, I don't, I'm not worth anything. But to the point where you know that without God, you can do nothing. That if you're going to do anything for God, it can't be through you. It can't be through your power. It has to be through the strength and the power that God gives you. And that's where Moses was. He was to a point of humility. He was to a point of insecurity. So Moses was ready. But the people of God were ready too. The people of God had got to the point. Now remember, if you remember when Joseph was giving out the grain that had been stored up during the 7 years of plenty. And during the 7 years of lack, the 7 years of famine, he gave out the grain. He sold the grain first. The people gave their livestock, and then eventually they gave their land and themselves. So even the Egyptians became servants. So the people of Israel were servants for a very long time. But it was only after the most recent king came into power that it really got to be where it was overwhelming. And that's a lesson for us. You know what? Before we're saved, we're in slavery. Jesus said, he that sins is a servant of sin. We're going to be a slave to something. To quote that great theologian, Bob Dylan, you're going to have to serve somebody. It may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody. So the people had been slaves for quite a while. But it only got to the point where their slavery was just overbearing and overwhelming that they cried out to God to the point where God said, it's time to do something. But it wasn't just because of their cries. The people were ready. But the most important thing was the fullness of time, to borrow a phrase from Paul, had come. The fullness of time. God had told Abraham that his descendants would be afflicted for 400 years. That 400-year span was coming to a close. Now, many of you who are Bible scholars will say, you know what? The Bible talks about 400 years, but it also talks about 430 years. What is up with that? Well, I want to give you a source. We're not going to talk about that tonight, but there's a source, Answers in Genesis, that will help to clear up that so-called conflict between the 400 years and the 430 years. And it's answersingenesis.org. Just go to Bible questions and just type in the search, how long were the Israelites in Egypt? And there's a great chart there that explains it and that just removes all doubt. Here's the thing about God's Word. Many people will say there's a conflict. There's no conflicts. No, you're just looking at it wrong. You have to realize that the Word of God is infallible, it's inerrant, it's inspired, and if you see a conflict, the conflict's not with God's Word. The conflict is with your understanding. And that's supposed to drive us deeper. That's supposed to drive us into the Word so that we can rightly divide the Word of truth. Because, there are people, our greatest calling is to evangelize. Our greatest calling is to reach those who need the gospel with the gospel. And there are many who are enemies of the gospel who have come up with all kinds of so-called gotchas. There are no gotchas. You need to be a student of the Word. You need to study. You need to be able to tell people that, no, that's not right. Now, are you going to have the answers all the time? No. But if you don't study this Word, you'll not have the answers any of the time. And in fact, your own faith may become in crisis if you listen to those people long enough. But realize that God cannot lie, and His Word is the truth. And if we'll use His Word to spread the truth, we'll see results. People will come to Christ. So the fullness of time had come. That was the prologue. Okay, so yes, I have by osmosis, I have got the alliteration bug from Russell. I'm not nearly as good at it as he is. So my Roman 2 is a theophanous plant. I needed a P. The burning bush is double alliteration, but that's already been used. So I had, anyway, a theophanous plant. Or you could say a Christophanous plant, depending upon your view here. You know what a theophany is? Okay, a theophany is God who appears to man, not necessarily as a person. He can appear as a burning bush. He can appear as a pillar of fire. He can or a cloud and a pillar of fire. He can appear as things that are not human, but he can also, let me just look at the word here. Here's how I know that this is, I think this is a Christophany, which a Christophany is a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ. And just as God doesn't have to appear as a man, neither does Christ. The key word I think here is it says in verse 2, it says, and the angel of the Lord. Not an angel of the Lord, but the angel of the Lord, the definitive article. This is a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ. And he even says, as he goes, that this is God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And then he goes on to say, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. So this was God, and I know, y'all know that. But that's what a theophany is. So first I see Moses' observations. Moses had several observations about this plant. First of all, it was impervious. The bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. Now, I watched a video of today at Mount Oreb, and man, I saw one plant that was growing in the wild without being irrigated. I saw one, and it was a perfect bush. And I thought to myself, that had to be what Moses saw. That particular type of plant that looked like it could easily have flame, and then the flame go up. You know how the flames lick at the top. I just closed my eyes and I pictured that, but it wasn't burning. And you would expect in the desert where there's no water, it didn't burn up. So there was something special about this bush. It was impervious, but it was also intelligent. It said, Moses, Moses. Not only did it speak, but it called him by name. Now, to me, that just tells me how personal my God is. When you were born again, God called you by name. He called you out of the world. He knows your name. And to me, that is so incredible. And I can't imagine how Moses must have felt. Here he has been 40 years in the wilderness. He feels like probably God has forgotten all about him. No, God has not forgot about him. In fact, he knows his name, and he calls him. So it was intelligent. But it was also instructive. Verse 6 says, and he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. But you know what? I read the wrong verse. It was instructive. Verse 5, do not come near. Take the sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. So we know this is God. Now let me ask you this. Was the ground holy itself? In and of itself, inherently, was the ground holy? What made that ground holy? The presence of God. And you know what? Friends, that's what makes you holy. Not your actions, because you can't be good enough to be holy. Your good works will not make you holy. It's the presence of the living God inside of you in the form of the Holy Spirit who indwells you. That's what makes you holy as well. So he says, do not come near, take the sandals off your feet. The place on which you're standing is holy ground. And then it was illuminating. He said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. According to Hebrews 11, 24 and 25, Moses, by faith, had left Egypt. Now, 40 years later, here was God speaking to him face to face. I just can't even imagine what that had to feel like for Moses. It had to be a light going on, saying, you know what? I was brought up, my mom was my wet nurse, and I don't know if he was 5 years old when he was weaned, but we know that Jacob was, Isaac was. He was 5 years old. So, during that time, he heard all about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. David made the point last week about how that he knew who he was. By the time he was 40 years old, he made the decision, not only do I know who I am, but I know who I want to be. I want to be an Israelite. I don't want to be an Egyptian. That's why he decided he was going to take into his own hands and lead these people into freedom. He was going to deliver them by his hand. But of course, that was on his timetable. Now here he is 40 years later, God speaking to him face to face. What was his reaction? Well, first of all, he was inquisitive. He said, I will turn aside to see this great sight. At this time, he didn't have any idea other than this was a bush that was burning, but it wasn't consumed. So it piqued his interest. But he was also interactive. He responded when the bush called to him. He said, here I am. I think it's amazing. To me, I would have said, what? A bush is talking to me? But he just responded. And I think about when who was the prophet? So anybody can tell me who the prophet was that the donkey spoke to him? Yes. That wound up being just a conversation, like I would think then, just like this, I would think, why is a donkey talking to me? But he had a conversation as if that was the norm. And here, I think Moses is just saying, here I am, because he's trembling. He cannot believe that this bush is calling him by name. So he was interactive, but he was intimidated. Said he was afraid to look at God. Now, we know that this was the presence of God as a burning bush, but he was scared to death. But it was an awe. It was a fear. It was a reverence. It wasn't a fear where, like any time that an angel will appear to somebody who's an enemy of God, what happens to them? Well, they usually fall down and pass out or even die at the presence of God because they're enemies of God. This is somebody who God is calling. So God put a fear and an awe into him, but it wasn't a terror. So I think that third reaction of the awe and the fear and the reverence is the most critical. And I thought about how Moses' reaction reminds me of people who you're trying to share the gospel with. And this is kind of the reactions that many people can have. They can be inquisitive. Oh, well, tell me more about that. And you'll try to lead them further into the truth. And they might even interact with you. They might even, talk with you a while. But if they don't have a fear of God, they'll never come to the true and living God. Because let me tell you, when God saves you, He doesn't save you from the devil. He saves you from himself. He saves you from his wrath. And the only way that people will have a true fear, reverence, and awe of God is if you first tell them who they are in comparison to the holiness of God, and convey to them how holy God is, how righteous He is, what His demands are, and how that we're absolutely hopeless. That's when the fear and the awe and the reverence of God can take hold. And only till then. I've heard it said so often that you can't get someone saved until you get them lost. Until they realize where they truly stand with God. And the only way you'll do that is to tell them who God is and who they are. And when they're hopeless and when they're helpless and they have no other way, and they say, what shall we do? Then you introduce Jesus. Because Jesus bridges that gap. That standard that God demands, we can never meet. But Christ met it. He lived a perfect life. He fulfilled the law in every way. And He died on a cross and gave His life for us so that we might have eternal life. That's what we need to tell people. And if people don't get to that third step of having awe, having fear, having reverence, they will not be saved. Because to them it'll be a good story and it's good for you, but what's that got to do with me? I'm happy. We don't have to wait until people are in the gutter to give them the gospel either, by the way. They can be as happy as a lark and lost as a goose. So, Romans 3 or 2, I guess it is 3 already? Are you kidding me? Did I skip a page? No? Old school. Romans 3, God's purpose revealed. And that's in verses 7 through 9. Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings. And I have come down to deliver them out of the hands of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of the land to a good broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hittites, and the Jebusites. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel have come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which Egyptians oppress them. So first I see his pronouncements. His pronouncements were, he sees their affliction. And I looked up the Hebrew words here, And there are three things that God did. He said, I see their affliction, I hear their cries, and I know their suffering. And each one of those deals with a different aspect of the human psyche. First of all, he says, I see their affliction. And when he's talking about the affliction, he's talking about their distress. He's talking about their state of mind. He's talking about the psychological impact of everything that they're going through. And then when he says, I hear their cries, he's talking about their emotions. The fact that yes, they're emotional about this because of everything that they're going through. And he knows their suffering. And that's talking about physical pain. So God is pronouncing the fact that none of this was done behind his back. He is omniscient. He knows all things. And just as he knew their psychological issues, he knew their emotional issues, he knew their physical issues, he knows the same thing about all of us. Jesus said that he knows the numbers of the hair on your head. Sorry, Herschel. No, just kidding, buddy. But he knows the numbers of the hairs on our head. So if he knows that much about every one of us, he knows what we're going through. You know, sometimes when we're going through these things, we don't think God hears us. We don't think God sees us. We don't think God feels for us. But he does. And sometimes the fact that he's not answering now doesn't mean that he doesn't care. In fact, it may mean just the opposite. You need to go through what you're going through now. That doesn't sound good to us at the time. None of those things sounds good at the present, as Hebrews 12 tells us. But afterwards, it brings forth what God, the purpose that he has for it in your life. And that's a very loose paraphrase of Hebrews 12, but that's how God works. So those are his pronouncements. But his promises were, first of all, he will deliver them. Verse 8a says, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hands of the Egyptians. He will bless them. 8b, he says, to bring them out of the land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And in verse 9, he says, and now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress him. Now, this is implied, but implied in that is he will avenge them. So he will deliver them, he will bless them, he will avenge them. Those were the promises he was making that day to the children of Israel, but those are also the promises that hold true for us as believers. He will deliver you. If you're born again, you know what that means. Because it doesn't matter what you go through in your life, from the point that you're saved forward, none of that matters. It pales in comparison to what he has delivered us from. He has delivered us from an eternity without Christ. And not just an eternity without Christ, but an eternity of pain and suffering. Sometimes we forget to talk about that. We'll talk about a Christless eternity, and that is the absolute worst part of going to hell. But it's also very painful. Jesus talked about how the fire is not quenched and the flame and the worm dieth not. In other words, you're not going to escape the second death. The first death you're not going to escape either, but it's over like that. Then comes the second death. And when we know that about eternity, when we're so confident that the Word of God says it, and therefore I believe it, and we don't share that, that's like knowing the cure for cancer and just keeping it to yourself. In fact, it's much worse than that. So we need to share, friends. We really do. So God had said he sees their affliction, he hears their cries, he knows their suffering, he will deliver them, he will bless them, he will avenge them. So far, so good, right? So far, this sounds great. Moses has got to be listening to this, and he's going, yeah. Then comes verse 10. Verse 10 says, come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Wow. Pen just got stuck in it. Now, all of a sudden, it doesn't seem quite so great. And we'll see as we go that Moses really, he's very resistant to this calling. So that's my Roman 4 is Moses' protestations. Protestations is the actual pronouncement, but to me I like to say the word protest. Moses' protestations. That's in verses 3:11 through 4:15. Now here's where I'm going to do a lot of reading. So listen fast. But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt?" He said, "But I will be with you. And this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain." Then Moses said to God, "If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' what shall I say to them?" God said to Moses, "I am who I am." And he said, "Say this to the people of Israel, 'I am has sent me to you.'" God also said to Moses, "Say this to the people of Israel, 'The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, 'The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, of Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you and what has been done to you in Egypt, and I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. And they will listen to your voice.'" I'm going to stop there for a minute. My letter A is his first protestation is, "I'm inadequate." That's what he says. He says, "Who am I? Who am I that I'm going to bring your people out of the land of Egypt? I'm inadequate." And God's response to him was, "But I will be with you." And friends, that's all we need. If we don't feel inadequate, there's something wrong with us. When we have something as powerful as the gospel, and if we don't feel inadequate, we might be trained. We might know the gospel backwards and forwards, but if we don't feel inadequate, then the power is not resting in the gospel and God. We think it's resting in us. But Moses had the right attitude. He said, "I'm inadequate." He said, "But I will be with you." And then in verse 13, he says, "If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' what shall I say to them?" So basically what Moses was saying in a nutshell was, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. And you know, that's one of the biggest excuses that we use to not share the gospel. I don't know what to say. What if they ask me a question I don't know the answer to? That's exactly what Moses is saying. What if they ask me a question that I don't know the answer to? Well, God's response was, first of all, he says in verses 14 to 15, 14 to 15 says, as soon as I find it here, God said to Israel, or God said to Moses, "I am who I am." And he said, "Say this to the people of Israel, 'I am has sent me to you.'" God also said to Moses, "Say this to the people of Israel, 'The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations." So God's response was, proclaim who has sent you. Proclaim who has sent you. He tells him, he says, "I am." That phrase, you remember Jesus used that phrase. When he said, when the Pharisees were saying, "Well, we have Abraham as our father." Jesus' response in John 8 was, "Before Abraham was, I am." That's how I know this is a Christophany. Because Jesus used those words. He was equating himself with God because he is God. So he said, I am. That is the pre-existent God. Before Abraham was, or, honestly, extrapolate that out before the beginning of the world, before the earth was ever here. I am. So he's pre-existent. But yet he said, "I am the Lord." Now the Lord, anytime you see that Lord in capital letters in the Old Testament, that is God's personal name, Yahweh. That's how we pronounce it. That's how we think it's pronounced. It also Jehovah is how the old King James translates it. But either way, Yahweh, Jehovah, it's kind of been lost because the Jews have put such reverence on the name of God that they won't even they won't speak it. They won't write the vowels. They just write the consonants. So you proclaim the pre-existent God, but also the fact that he is a personal God. And then you proclaim why he has sent you. And it's basically a reiteration of the first part. He has sent you to deliver me from bondage, or them from bondage. And let's start and read down to 22 from 16. I got to find the sweet spot in my glasses. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you and what has been done to you in Egypt, and I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. And they will listen to your voice. And you and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us, and now please let us go a 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it. After that, he will let you go. And I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And when you go, you shall not go empty. But each woman shall ask of her neighbor, and any woman who lives in her house, for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing. You shall put them on your sons and on your daughters, so you shall plunder the Egyptians. So, when his protestation was what shall I tell them? He tells them first proclaim who God is, and then proclaim why he has sent you. He has sent you to deliver them from bondage, to fulfill part 2 of the Abrahamic covenant. Now, part 1 had already been fulfilled because of the time they had spent in Egypt. They had become a great nation already. So the legacy part of that threefold promise was already on its way to being fulfilled, because when they came out of Egypt, they had 603,000 people, men rather, and not including women and children. So, upwards of 2.5 million people. So they had already got that part of the threefold promise of the legacy. Now he says he's going to give them the land. The land that right now is inhabited by all the ites. That we know how that goes when they get there. It doesn't exactly, they don't exactly follow God's plan, but that's what his promise is. This is why he has sent you, so that part 2 of that Abrahamic covenant can be fulfilled. And then also to free them to worship. They're to go out into the desert and to worship God. Because they're not allowed to do that in Egypt. Because in Egypt, Pharaoh is God. And he's just one of many of the gods. But you don't worship anyone besides Pharaoh. And to display his mighty power. He says that, Pharaoh, he's not going to let you go. He's going to be resistant. And I'm going to have to spank him good. And boy, does he ever. And we know he does. We know that he's a stubborn guy, man. It takes 10 plagues to convince him. But that's what the purpose is to free them to worship and to display his mighty power and to provide for the future. Because he says when you go out, you're not going to go out broke. And I think it's so cool that when it comes to jewelry, it's the women that are supposed to ask. God knows women, right? So they ask all the other women for their jewelry. Why? So that when they set up the tabernacle, they took an offering for the tabernacle. Later on, you'll see that, I'm sure. And they got from everybody all of their jewelry so that they could make the gold and the silver and the bronze ornaments in the temple. God was providing for them. He was providing for what they would need later. Man, I'm so glad I serve a God that provides for my needs. The needs I don't know I have. They had no idea they would need these things. But God knew, and he had provided a way to do it. So then we come to his next protestation, and that's in 4:1. 4:1, then Moses answers, but behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, the Lord did not appear to you. Basically what Moses is saying is, I'm not persuasive. Because he says they will not believe me. But God's response is in verses 2 through 9. He says, the Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? He said, a staff. And he said, throw it on the ground. So he threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent, and Moses ran from it. But the Lord said to Moses, put out your hand and catch it by the tail. So he put out his hand and caught it, and it became a staff in his hand. that they may believe that the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. Again, the Lord said to him, put your hand inside your cloak. And he put his hand inside his cloak, and when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous, like snow. Then God said, put your hand back inside your cloak. So he put it back inside his cloak, and when he took it out, behold, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. If they will not believe you, God said, or listen to the first sign, they may believe the latter sign. If they will not believe even these two signs or listen to your voice, you shall take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground, and the water that you shall take from the Nile will become blood on the ground. So when he said they will not believe me, God's response was, you know what? I'm going to give you the gift of signs and wonders. You're going to be able to do these things just because I say that you will, and you're going to have your staff that'll turn into a serpent. You're going to be able to display leprosy on your hand, and then immediately it's healed. He was showing him that he had power over creation with the staff. He was showing them that he had power over disease with the leprosy. And then he said, if that doesn't work, then you'll take some water from the Nile, and that will turn to blood as you pour it on the ground. Now, the first two he demonstrated to Moses. The third, Moses would just have to believe by faith, And thankfully, he didn't have to use that. Well, I don't believe he did. It says later that he showed the signs, but I don't think he had to go that far, because the people were going to believe him. God had gave him that promise. He gave him that assurance. They will believe you. And as believers, when we share the gospel with people, not everyone is going to believe. We know that. We know that from experience. But those who God has called will. Those who God has chosen will. They're just waiting for you to share the gospel. God has mercy upon whom he will have mercy. Don't you want to be a part of that? Don't you want to share that with people so that not for your glory, but for his? God will use somebody. Let it be you. So all three of those signs had one purpose, though, that they may believe. Now, while we don't have the gifts of signs and wonders today, we have something far more powerful. We have something far more powerful to persuade unbelievers. I'm going to read to you from Hebrews chapter 4, verses 12 and 13. For the word of God is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing to the division of soul and of spirit, of joints and of marrow, and discerning the thoughts and intentions of the heart. And no creature is hidden from his sight, but all are naked and exposed to the eyes of him to whom we must give an account. That is a more powerful weapon than signs and wonders. I remember before I got saved, I'd been in church all my life, or all my young life. When I was 16, I told my mom, "You're not big enough to make me go. See ya." And I didn't return to church until I was in my 30s. But it stuck with me. And when I did return, it just seemed like the preacher was just talking right at me. It didn't matter what the sermon was, because I went several times before I actually finally submitted, repented, and trusted Christ. But when I would hear the gospel preach, man, it would cut to the quick. And that's what it says. It says right there. It says that piercing to the division of soul and of spirit. Friends, the Word of God is powerful. And when we preach it and we share it like we should, sit back and watch what God will do. I think sometimes we try too hard in our own strength, like Moses did initially. We try too hard. We don't need to try. We just need to be available. And God will do what God will do. So then he's got another excuse, if you will. In verse 10, but Moses said to the Lord, "O my Lord, I am not eloquent, either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and of tongue." What's he saying? He said, I'm not a good communicator. He says, I'm not eloquent. I'm not able to say what you want me to say. I remember the first time that I was allowed to get up and teach. quite a few years ago, and it was in my former church. And I read this verse, 1 Corinthians 2:3, where Paul says, I was with you in fear and weakness and much trembling. And at that moment, that was my life verse, because I was scared to death. Because I'm not eloquent. I'm not a good speaker. I don't have a way with words. But you know, Billy Sunday, one of the greatest preachers ever, he didn't either. We don't need to be eloquent. We just need the truth. We just need to speak the truth. And if we'll do that, God will use us. No matter how eloquent or not uneloquent. See, I told you that we are, God can and will use us. God's response was, then the Lord said to him, who has made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be your mouth and teach you what you shall speak. But he said, well, no, I'm going to stop there. So he says, I will be your mouth and teach you what you shall speak. So God's response was, I'll teach you what you need to know. Now here's something. It's very explicit that God is the teacher. What's implicit is we're the students. We've got to be students of the Word. We have to study to show ourselves approved, a workman that need not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. See, because God will give you the words to say in the moment that you need to say them. He promised his disciples that. When he told the disciples about what was coming, that they're going to bring you before the magistrates, they're going to bring you before the courts. And don't think to yourself what you're going to say, for in that very moment, I will give you the words to say. And that promise holds true for us as well. We don't need to do a crash course. We need to slowly learn, take in the Word of God on a regular basis. And God will implant that and engraft that in your soul and in your heart. And He'll write His Word on the tablet of your heart, and you'll be able to share. And you'll be amazed when you have a conversation with someone, how that God gives you the words in the moment. Just like He promised the disciples. In the moment you need them, He gives them to you. And I have many times walked away from conversations with tears in my eyes, thanking God for giving me the words to say, because I couldn't even believe I was the one saying it. I was hearing it coming out of my mouth, and I'm going, wow. God's promised that. You don't have to be eloquent. You need to be available. You need to be a student, and He will be your teacher. Then finally, He gives him the last excuse. He says, oh, my Lord, please send someone else. Basically, he is saying, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. And God's response was, He got angry. He said, then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and He said, is there not Aaron, your brother the Levite? I know that he can speak well. Behold, he is coming out to meet you, and when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. See, God already knew what he needed. God already knew what he was going to say. Of course, God knows everything. But God had already prepared for him what he needed. And when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and I will teach you both what to do. That's the first discipleship class. Moses is going to make a disciple out of Aaron. God has spoken to Moses, and now Moses is going to articulate those same words to Aaron. Man, that is a picture of us. What was the Great Commission? Go and make disciples. That's what Moses is told to do here. So, God's response was initially anger, but then it was accommodation. God graciously allowed for Aaron to speak for Moses. But here's what I'll say. Sometimes when God is trying to lay something on your heart, when God is calling you to do something, you know, we all tend to make excuses, and I do it, you do it, we all do it. That's part of the human condition, is we'll make excuses. But sometimes be careful what you wish for, because when he gave him Aaron, remember what Aaron was pretty famous for? It wasn't very long after this that Aaron took all that jewelry that God blessed him with, melted it down, and made a golden calf. So when God is trying to call you for something, don't make excuses, because sometimes your excuses can turn out to be liabilities in the end. And that's what happened with Moses, with Aaron. Even though Aaron, he was the first priest, God, that just highlights God's forgiveness. I mean, if God waited for perfect people, he'd never have anybody, right? He knows what we are. He knows that we're but dust. He knows our condition. And yet He has mercy, and He's gracious to us, and He gives us what we need when we need it, and He forgives us. And He did the same thing for Aaron. But again, be careful what you wish for. And then finally, I have permission to part. And that's verse 18 of chapter 4. It says, Moses went back to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, please let me go back to my brothers in Egypt to see whether they are still alive. And Jethro said to Moses, go in peace. Now, did Moses need to get Jethro's permission to depart after God had told him that he needed to depart? Culturally, yes. Culturally, he needed to do that. He was his son-in-law. He couldn't just all of a sudden up and disappear. Relationally, he also needed to, because again, his father-in-law. We find out later that because he did this, he was able to come back and he sent word for Jethro to come and come to him and bring his wife and his 2 sons. Probably wouldn't have been able to do that had he not asked for this permission. But ultimately, no, he didn't need to ask permission. And sometimes when we're called to do things, we'll want to get everybody else's approval instead of just taking God for His word. And it's fine if you can get the approval, but you don't need it. When God calls you, you don't need anybody's approval but His. I think also that this highlights Moses' humility. In Numbers 12:3, it talks about the fact that Moses was the most humble man on the face of the earth. I think it just highlights that. He wasn't going to be, I think of the word, he wasn't going to be presumptuous in thinking that I can just leave. Jethro would be fine with it. He wanted to make sure. He wanted to make sure he didn't leave a relationship broken. Was Moses forthcoming, though, as to the reason for his departure? Because he said to him, he says, please let me go back to my brothers in Egypt to see whether they are still alive. That ain't exactly why he was going. He had been commissioned by God to go. Why do you think he did that? Was he trying to be deceitful? I don't think so. I think that it highlights his humanness. I think even though he had just seen God face to face, there was still that doubt and still that uncertainty, and that he didn't want to announce these grandiose plans and then wind up being wrong. I think it just helps us to relate to Moses more, because he's just like us. And that's what I love about the Word of God and the heroes of the Bible, is they're just like us. So God, we think of Moses as this great, great man, and he was. But he wasn't any different than you and me. And he didn't have any different, really. He had it on a grander scale, but he didn't have any different calling than we do. Our calling is to deliver God's people. We don't know who those people are. That's why we got to tell everybody. We need to follow Moses' example. He was a reluctant leader. Let us not be reluctant Christians.